Hi, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Rooted In podcast. It is Season 2, Episode 3. Very exciting. We are joined by... We're all here. That's what I meant. Everybody's here. The whole Rooted crew. Hi, everyone.
Hello. Hello.
And if you remember from listening to the second episode of this season, we gave kind of an overview, an in-general look at what deep learning is, why it's important, and kind of some of the avenues that we might go down to achieve deep learning. And so this is one of the first episodes where we're really going to dive deeply into one of the pieces of deep learning. So we're kind of picking apart what we had been talking about in that previous episode, in episode 2 of this season. And this more specific subject is really a hail to the heroes of the education world, which is the educator itself.
Exactly. Today we're taking a look at ourselves as educators and kind of covering the ideas of what we bring to the table, because as educators it's important to consider that first and to always be considering that as you are teaching. So we're going to be talking about what we already know, the ways that you individually and we as educators think, and the things that the help that we enlist from others, sort of outside influences that are going to help improve our education and sort of secure our efficacy as teachers.
Right, and if you listen all the way through today's episode, we have kind of a special thank you gift that we'll go over at the end. That is a nice little educator discount on our website for some of a new product that's coming out in the winter. So keep listening for that.
Yeah, so today we're going to be asking you, the educator, some questions to help you reflect on your own teaching in this season of reflection and resolutions, because it is January, and this is the time of year that we probably think about this the most. We want you to get a jump start on that and be considering it all year long.
Yeah, so grab your blanket and your tea or your coffee or whatever, get warm and cozy, and ask yourself some questions.
That's right.
Ready for the hard questions. I had a good friend, Kay Stafford, that I worked with in Washington, D.C. at the National Child Research Center as a preschool in Washington, D.C., and Kay used to say that whenever a student wasn't getting something, whenever the child was struggling, that's when it was time to roll up your sleeves and teach. And I always loved that saying. In fact, the first time she said it to me, I just laughed, like, well, of course. But the truth of the matter is, it is really easy to look at struggling learners and blame them. And also feel like here is this problem, and it's this mountain we all have to climb. And it's not unusual to forget that we, the educators, we have our own
unique mindset.
Mindset, yes. And we really need to stop and look at what does it mean to roll up our sleeves and teach, and what is it about ourselves that makes us uniquely qualified for that, and what about myself do I need to change, perhaps?
Well, it reminds me of, there's a saying that goes around the business world that communication is the responsibility of the communicator.
Yeah.
Right.
So it's one of those that comes back on you. If you have a child who's not getting something, you have to keep digging and digging for a better way to communicate what you're trying to get across.
And there are always components of needing to help kids take some responsibility for their learning. We're not saying that, you know, it is all on an educator. However, we want today to be about considering what you yourself can change when things don't seem to be, you know, going positively, going the way you want.
Right. To take just kind of the positive spin of that is also when things are going well, what is it that you, the educator, have brought to that?
Right.
So it's a little bit of like tooting your own horn as well as
metacognitive analysis as well.
Well, yeah.
Right, that we want to learn what worked, what did we do that made it better. And I have a story today about a time that I faced a struggle and I had to roll up my sleeves and figure out how to teach. And it's a story about my own daughter and my teaching with my daughter. And I think it's a good story because, many of our listeners are home educators. Some of our listeners are traditional educators. Some are speech language therapists and reading interventions and writing intervention specialists. So we all have these relationships with kids, and this situation kind of taps in a little bit, not only just on the parent side, but on the teacher side as well. So I know some of you have mentioned that, or have heard me mention that my oldest daughter, Emma, struggled with attention. And the way this played out in her schoolwork, both when she was in traditional school and when she homeschooled, is she would have difficulty completing tasks. Not because she didn't have the knowledge base to complete the task, but having the wherewithal, the executive functioning skills to pull herself together to get tasks done was a struggle for her. So I had to ask myself these questions that we are going to unpack today that Maura already talked about. What did I know? As most of you know, I'm a speech language therapist. I had a number of years, a couple decades of training in that at the time I tackled this, and I had some knowledge of executive functioning skills and those struggles. How did I think? Mostly, I thought like a teacher and that I was in charge of the outcome, and the help I enlisted. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit, both me seeking out the advice of some experts and doing my own continuing ed, and also looking for a trusted friend who gave me some good advice as well. So this is my story. I had a daughter who I was in pretty much a daily struggle. When she was in school, it was all about she was being kept in at recess because she didn't get tasks done. And she had homework at home, so we spent all evening on this homework that wasn't getting done, which case I decided, hey, this isn't working. If I'm going to struggle with her over getting tasks done, I'd rather do it in the morning than at night when we're both tired. Started homeschooling her, and we still, though, were constantly, it could be 6 o'clock at night, and what, could have been done by noon still wasn't done. And so this was just a source of frustration for, frankly, both Emma and I.
So that brings us to our first question that we want you to ask yourself as an educator. And that is, what do you need? Which sounds very simple, but you can already feel from Rita's story, it requires a great deal of analysis, kind of evaluation, looking at your specific situation and really asking yourself, what do I need?
Yes. So in my case, I had a problem, this learning problem, and I needed a solution to help Emma through this learning problem. And that learning problem was causing a teacher problem too, So here was this problem. I had it. I needed a solution. So as Tracy said, the first question you ask yourself is, what is it that I need? One of the things I needed was hope. I needed some hope that there was going to be an answer for this. And I needed to see some positive change. And I think Emma needed that too, because she was having all her feelings around this issue as well. So I had to look at, what did I need? That was where my starting point was.
If I can I think this is an interesting difference in that I feel like we frequently ask what the student needs or what the kid needs. Mm-hmm. And I think it can be tough sometimes to then turn that just around on yourself. That it can be easy to answer what I need. Well, I need this to be fixed for my kid.
Right. Yes.
Which is actually really what your kid needs. But
right.
It's keeping that kind of in the
framework of yourself.
Yeah. Right, and I think you're right, Claire, that the way we answer that, I can be this way. I just want my problems to go away, right? I just want whatever's making life stressful to not be there.
What do I need for this not to be happening?
No problems.
Yes, I need no problems and happily ever after, right? Right, exactly. And really, I think pinpointing, I need a way, for me, I needed some way to help Emma stay focused in on task and have that be in a positive way that she could see gains and we could figure out what worked for her, right? Not just I need her to be better, or I need her to make my job easier. Right?
Yeah. So one of the things to remember in these kind of educator reflection questions is to try to be as specific when you're reflecting on these things, as specific as you can, because that will help you arrive at solutions more than just general, I wish this wasn't happening, right?
Right, and you saying that, so another thing I needed a way to present tasks from my responsibility, a way to present whatever materials we were using, or to find the right materials, or to have some methodology around that would be helpful to her, so that from the start we were off in a better place than we had been. So
right, and that already gives you some idea of maybe where to start looking for your solution, right? We're getting into some psychology here. The more specific you are in identifying your need, the easier you will arrive at some sort of solution or path, really.
Right.
A path.
So just to recap, question number 1 is, what do you need?
So that brings us to question 2. What skills do you bring to the learning relationship? And when you look at this question, just a kind of overview word of caution, don't undervalue your own skills. There will be some formal skills that you bring in terms of your education and whatnot, and there will be some inborn, more instinctive type skills that are also yours. You own them, so recognize them for what they are.
Right. So in my story, as I already mentioned, I had training as an SLP, and I had some knowledge of executive functioning skills. In some ways, that also could stand in my way. Because I initially felt like, hey, I should know this. I should get this. I should not be struggling with this issue. Another skill I brought, harder to define, was because I was her mom, I understood her strengths and her struggles, and I loved her fiercely. And again, because I loved her fiercely, though, maybe that meant I might have been a little harder on her than I should have been, or, my tendency, I was raised in a household with pretty much zero tolerance for not getting things done, and it was just pretty much expected. So I, would draw on that kind of background, and it seemed like, why isn't that working? It worked for me, and I really did have this, hey, we're just going to muscle it out here. I'm going to roll up my sleeves and teach till we figure this out. And that was what I brought to the learning relationship. What was good about that is I was willing to take some ownership in it. What was hard about it was sometimes that could have created a tendency to not look outside of myself as soon as maybe I should have.
So that brings us to our third question, and this is a truly introspective one. What bias do you bring to teaching? It's very difficult to judge for yourself, so it's going to require some real thinking and probably some outside help.
Yeah, and a good thing to remember about considering your own bias is something Rita already touched on, which is thinking back to how you were taught, and maybe also some of the dynamics of your household, which, parents do a lot of teaching, even if they weren't the ones formally educating you. They were educating you in many ways. So how your parents sort of ran the household, things you may have picked up from them, things you may have picked up from teachers throughout your own education, those are going to shape your teaching, whether it's because you've completely rejected something you thought didn't work for you, or because you've sort of subtly embraced something because of years of having that, experience yourself. So
right, and you can have a lot of bias that I am not going to do this the way my family did, and therefore miss some jumps, right? Or you can be in the other direction. I'm going to do this exactly the way my parents did, and you have your own unique set of kids and a whole different generation, different expectations, different challenges. So and you are different. You're a different person than your parents were. So all of that can really be tricky. When I had to think about my own biases, there were two kinds of resources. One is, I really do believe it's important to have a very small select few people in your life who can speak truth to you. So, I had this select group of people that I knew I could trust. And I would try with those few people to be honest about the good, the bad, and the ugly, about what I was thinking toward this issue. And but I also needed to find someone I could trust who was a challenge for me. So if I surround myself only with speech language pathologists, then I'm going to get mostly that view. If I surround myself with only people of my same faith, I might get only that view. If I surround myself only with people who are like me and very organized and get things done, then I would have that view. So I really had to think about who were my challenge people and who could I really trust. So when
by challenge people, you mean people who will challenge you.
Yes.
Yes. Not be a challenge for you.
They don't necessarily think the way you do
think
about
the way
everything.
you think.
Yes, and they may think very differently from me. So I have to be willing to embrace some of these different ideas. So I started to look at my own bias, and the truth was I didn't really know what it feels like to struggle with this particular problem. It's not that I don't have any struggle in my life. It's not that I don't think I have, real weaknesses in my life. It's just in particular, this particular struggle of attention is not one that I have, although I am getting worse as I age.
I was going to say, sometimes our meetings are a little like, okay, Rita, attend to what we're doing.
I am a logical thinker, and I am really performance driven. So for me, just checking the boxes in a day, and for me having some teacher pat me on the back and say good job, was really what it took to motivate me. But consequently, I'm not good at living in the moment, and my daughter Emma is awesome at living in the moment, and I had a lot to learn from her about that. I am hyper responsible, so I always feel like I have to solve every problem put in my path, and maybe I don't give things enough time. Maybe I don't give them their own path often enough. This is my personal struggle and my personal weakness. So I started to recruit some friends. What do I need to hear? And I have this friend, Jo Dyke, who's a good friend of mine, and she really does think differently. And she definitely embraced my daughter with full appreciation for who she was and her creativity and her impulsiveness and all of that. She found much, joy in. And so one of the things Jo told me is I was so busy educating that I actually was being too controlling. She was an oldest child, and she really wanted me to back off more. So where I would see disorganization and want to move in and organize, that moving in to organize, which I thought was helping to frame up a good learning environment, that perhaps Emma felt like this is too much control, and now I'm wanting to really back off from all of this framework that you've created for me. And so I actually was setting up what I thought was being helpful. I came to realize through this help of another person that I actually was setting up a situation that made Emma want to pull back. And so when I acted in this counterintuitive way of giving her more control, letting her mess it up more, and giving her, and saying, I think you can do this, and let me know if you need my help, she actually started to rise to that level of thinking and was starting to get more tasks done because they were hers now. And while I thought I was giving her ownership, like teaching her ownership, I was being too involved. And I wasn't able to see that in myself at all. Not at all. And so I think even when she'd come home with homework, that's even worse. So it's not just the home educator. Traditional school, she's going to go back and get grades.
Yeah, that makes it even harder sometimes.
It is.
Yeah.
She's going to feel bad about the grade. She's going to compare herself to other kids. So then you're even like, wow, we got to really get this done. We have to really make this right. And I don't want you to like start to think that a bad grade doesn't matter, but on the other hand, I hate it that you're being graded on everything. So, it was just tough. The things that were motivating me to organize her more were actually not very helpful. And that was a bias I could not see.
Yeah.
If I can real quick just go back to kind of your first point that you had initially made under this question about the fact that you don't know what it feels like to struggle with the difficulty that Emma had, where I think that's a lot of, like at least with the students I see, I feel like you get one camp or the other in an extreme of either they're very, very familiar with it because it's something that they have been struggling with, or they have no idea because they've never encountered this before and then don't know how to teach to it.
You mean the parent?
You mean the parent?
Yeah,
Yes.
sorry, the parent educator. Yeah, sorry. But I think it's an interesting point that if you, in answering that question about the bias you have, spend some time with looking at, am I actually familiar with what is happening and what this struggle is? And I don't necessarily mean familiar with on just a like clinical level, like can I define what this problem is? But do I know what it means? Yeah, can you empathize? Do I know what it means to day after day have this or work with this?
Or do I have this similar type of struggle, but not at all in this venue, right? Like, you can often create some empathy by being like, you know what, I don't struggle with, this academic realm per se, but I have a struggle with this type of thing when it comes to cooking or when it comes to exercise or when it, and that can kind of help you be like, well, if this was this thing that I hate, I may look differently. And that can help you, kind of discover some of the feelings that your child or your student may be feeling.
Right.
Well, and I think we can have a bias if we have experienced the same struggle too. So that's something else to realize, that just because this particular thing hurt you or this particular aspect made you feel this certain way, we can get super protective of our kids because we don't want them to feel and experience what we felt, and they may not be anyway, Right. So that's something to consider. You mentioning that with Emma, one of the things that Emma has struggled with that has contributed to her attention problems is she had a lot of autoimmune issues in terms of her allergies. So she would get hives, she would have itching, all kinds of things. And I remember I was trying to take a natural nutrition product in it. I can't remember what was in it. I think it was primrose oil or something. Anyway, every time I took this pill, my hands would start burning. They would turn red, and I would have that pinprick itchiness on my hands. And one day I was like looking at my hands, realizing, hey, this happens exactly 15 minutes after I take this pill every day, and putting it all together. And I was describing to Emma what I was feeling. And Emma said, oh, I know just what you're feeling. That's what it feels like for me when I'm having an allergic reaction. Well, that's like all of September for her and half of October. No wonder she couldn't attend. Like, it just really, it made me realize, like, oh my gosh, I can't think of anything but this burning sensation. And she deals with that on a regular basis. So is this really an attention problem, or is this an allergy problem? Like, there's so many things that you just don't know.
Yeah, they're so interwoven. Yeah.
Yes, and was I listening enough or investigating enough on that little thing about her allergies instead of like quickly thinking, oh, it's all this other thing I think I understand.
And the good thing to remember, too, is you might have a tendency to think, well, why didn't she just tell me, right? That, hey, I'm struggling here because my allergies are acting up and this is making it hard. Kids are still developing that level of metacognitive, analyzing what all may be affecting me here. Why am I struggling?
Yeah, they don't know.
They might not always know, right?
Well,
and so it can be easy to think that your kid will just let you know if something is up, but you have to do a little more digging than that.
Adults don't know.
Yeah, adults don't always know.
You're like short-tempered about something and irritable about something, and then you realize that, oh, I'm getting sick. Like, now I have a cold, or I'm hungry.
Yeah, I'm worried about thus and
I'm
such,
stressed,
and I'm displacing that worry.
Well, we've all had a time when someone else has said, I think you're, blah, 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 someone close to you, and you're like, I'm not. oh, maybe that might be it, right? You hadn't even quite identified that in yourself yet. So
Right. Well, Tracy has a story of her sister who had a hernia, and she thought everyone experienced what she experienced. She didn't know. Found out I was like practically blind when I was 12. I didn't know that other people could see leaves and grass. I didn't know it. So I never told anyone I can't see the leaves and grass.
And that is something you had touched on earlier, that you just don't know what you don't know.
Yes,
right? And that's part of what makes identifying your biases difficult.
Yes, so our kids don't either.
Yep.
Right?
Yeah. So let's move on to our next question. And Rita, you started to touch on this one when you were talking about the being worried about performance, the pressure of a performance and the response to that on the part of your student or your child. So question 4 is, what do you worry about?
Right. It's interesting when you ask that, because I needed assurance that it wasn't my fault. And as much as I do think roll up your sleeves and teach, there is a lot that you take on with that what am I doing wrong? And I hear that a lot from educators. Like, it's good to ask yourself what you're missing, but then you can be condemning of yourself too. Like, I'm probably the one who's causing this.
Not giving yourself some grace
right,
that you might need.
Right.
That can be particularly hard for parent educators. Mm-hmm. Now you've got the 2 hats.
Yeah, right, both. And then also, I needed to be understanding. I needed the understanding and reassurance that it wasn't Emma's fault either. And it sounds funny to say, like, it's not that intellectually I didn't know that this was her own particular bag of strengths and weaknesses, but it's really easy when you get into a teaching situation with a child, or any, a parent-child situation, that it's easy to just start taking things personal, and you start kind of silently blaming the kid, right? It's just really
or
easy.
Not so silently.
Or not so silently, yeah. And it's that same thing, like, I just want the problem to go away, and actually you're standing in the way of that, right? Mm-hmm. So it's easy to feel this kind of displaced anger, and then you feel bad about that too, So, but you need really that knowledge and reassurance of what's really going on, so that you can separate it from your relationship with that child. And I think teachers in classrooms are like that too. Like, you can have that one child in the classroom that the whole day would be easier if that one child would be removed. Like, everything could go easier if you didn't have this major issue going on that you had to deal with. And I think it's realistic to have those feelings. And also, we need to separate out what's happening so that we don't have this negative feeling toward the child. Right. I was worried, therefore, for our about the stress this was putting on our relationship. One of the things that I came to realize is, one of the things I needed to do was start talking about how much Emma and I were alike, instead of me thinking. One time I realized I was thinking, I'm just not this way. I'm so different. And then I thought, that's actually not healthy for me to keep thinking that way. So I started working on, this is how we're like. Well, turns out we have a ton of things in common. There are many, many things. And by the way, even some things that I found hard to deal with that actually, sadly, are very much like myself. Other people have to deal with it in me, right? But also, we do have a lot in common. We are united in so many ways. And that had a huge impact on just our relationship. And still does. And I also worried that I kept trying all these things and they weren't making enough of a difference, and it wasn't happening fast enough. And what was the outcome going to be? And all of that I think anyone who's a parent knows, all those kinds of worries.
Yep.
So true.
So these feelings, she's telling a story that's very parent educator focused, but all of these feelings are sort of, going to be what comes with being an educator in any form. We constantly, when we feel that we have this responsibility over a child's education, as educators do, you have constant fear of failure, and that could be failure on your part as the educator, or you have a fear that your student will fail. feelings of helplessness as an educator when you've tried so many different things. You know, I do feel like I respond to things that aren't working, and I try this, and then I try that, and then I try this, and I try that, and then like nothing seems to be working. So that can make you feel a little bit helpless. That can also lead to lots of frustration and anger, and that's always really hard because you never quite know where to place it, because it's easy to, you know, when the frustration and anger is always wrapped up in the student that seems to be, you know, causing that frustration and anger, or always a part of that frustration and anger, to take out your frustration and anger on the student themselves, or on yourself, right? You can be frustrated with yourself and then have that be part of this kind of constant negative self-talk that isn't helping anyone. Feeling stupid or inadequate, we know students who struggle often feel this way, and you can feel that way as an educator as well, especially with students who struggle, because they require so much more unique strategies and, you know, little niche type things that aren't sort of those things that work for the broad, the typical student, etc. And so that can make you feel like, I'm just not qualified. I don't know what I'm doing here.
Maybe I haven't read enough.
Enough.
They also require more time.
Yes.
Which you can have trouble
Identifying.
understanding when's enough.
Exactly.
You know, am I just spinning my wheels?
Exactly. Completely. And then feeling like you're being judged by others. I mean, I think this just comes with the territory of living, you know, not in isolation. You're constantly around other teachers or other parents, you know, your peers, etc. We tend to, you know, especially women, but also men, you know, we share problems that we're having with other people to kind of, you know, feel that sense of community. And sometimes that can result in feeling like, oh, you know, this person's not having that issue, and therefore, you know, what am I doing wrong, right? Or, you know, sometimes feeling judgment that may be happening, may not be happening. It's easy to just feel a judgment from others when they're not necessarily experiencing what you're experiencing. And then also, of course, feeling a loss of control, which just comes with the territory of, you know, working with people. We can't control everything about humans. Humans are, you know, a force, and kids especially are not always going to do things the way you think they will. They are developing people, and therefore, you know, a little bit uncontrollable. We can't always know how things are going to work out, and so that can be difficult. Especially educators tend to be people who like control. People who gravitate towards education are people who are, you know, maybe those more organized thinkers, etc. And so not knowing where things are going to go or the path that a child might take can feel very uncomfortable.
And, you know, now that you just unpacked all that more, I'm feeling a need to remind everybody that we titled this, you know, that you are the hero. The educator is the hero. Because, you know, every good hero story, there's always that
struggle,
battle, right? There's always that
you
struggle.
have to descend.
Yes, right. I mean, that is
right,
part of
descend.
what makes you a hero, is this really clawing your
Being
way
in the trenches.
through. Yeah.
Yeah.
Epic battle.
Right,
Yeah.
the epic battle. So when you're having all these feelings, you don't feel like the hero, you know, and you can stop at any point in any, you know, hero tale, and they're not going to be feeling
It
like...
appears that things will not get better for them, right?
Yes,
At any point in
right.
time.
I was actually thinking something similar earlier in listening to you talk, Rita, that it was making me kind of go back and forth about this idea where it's like, okay, you're giving very, very specific examples, having been a parent and an educator and a parent educator, like all those pieces. And being willing to look at your own life and go, okay, this was my hero's journey. Like, I will now sort of declare myself as a hero for having done these things and doing these things without being like, haha, I'm this shining example of all things right. It's not that. But it's like, I don't know. I think it's a neat, because you can still get bogged down in the darker feelings, in the more, this one kid I can't connect to, or this one strategy never works, or this whatever it might be.
When you haven't gotten to the other side.
Right.
Yeah.
I don't know. I just think it's kind of a cool thing. Like, I don't know.
Yeah, and it's a good perspective to consider this, although it is hard when you're in the midst of it, but to consider it as your journey, and that every journey has its you know...
Nader.
Right, exactly, and we'll experience the peak, you know, and then you will be on the other side someday. And what can help that hero's journey, you know, maybe be a little bit more smooth in the midst of it, is this kind of frame of constant self-reflection and really dynamic teaching.
Yeah, I guess more to my point of the goal of self-reflection is not to make you feel like bad about everything.
Right.
Yes.
But that it's like you are a hero. Like,
Right.
and everybody for having done whatever their version of it is.
Exactly.
So.
Exactly.
But moving on from there, one of the other kind of fluctuating feelings that can happen while you're in the midst of teaching, there's several different kind of back and forth ideas. And one of them was, Rita, what you had kind of initially started with in talking about is a wait and see approach versus a like jump in, roll up your sleeves, go do something about it approach. And Rita had said like she's the kind who she's definitely always on that one side of the fence of constantly rolling up her sleeves, and it's like, I'm not going to wait around and see for anything, I'm just going to jump in. And you can get pulled back and forth or be squarely on one side of that. And I think there are at times when one is better than the other, because there are times when it's like, I would like to see actually
Give something more time than you were giving
a little
it.
more
yeah.
time. But a lot of what we do is very much like, go do something about it, go try something, and then see how that went, and then go try another thing, right? But there is this kind of back and forth for your own feelings as an educator.
Right, that wait and see versus intervention, right? So for me, even backing off, though, was an intervention. Right? Because I wasn't just going to be floating out in the middle of the ocean with the waves, crashing around, and then, gosh, I hope I don't drown, kind of thing.
So what you're really saying is there a difference between waiting to just see if anything will happen and giving something time.
Right.
Yeah.
I guess that's a better way of putting it.
Right.
Yeah.
But even giving it time, I still had to be doing that hard work of reflection as a teacher in order to even let her, to figure out so it wasn't like, hey, you can do anything you want all day long and I'll just give it time to see if you ever do anything. Right. It was more like, these are the things we need to do. And you can choose the order. And you can choose where in the house you are, except when we have to be doing our joint teaching times, you need to be here, know? Right. And if they're not done, it's going to still need to be done, and there will be consequences for that, but you're aware of those consequences. Right. And I'm not going to blow my top over it, hopefully.
Yeah, actually, when you said back off, it was actually more of like letting her take more of the ownership over the things that still needed to happen.
They still need to. So it wasn't like, I'm not going to teach you at all. And so in that way, it is interesting because you see and I think that is a bias, right? So that comes back to our biases, that some people really have much more of a wait and see philosophy, and they really embrace that, and it has some value for some things. And some of us are much more,
jump in, do it all.
Jump in, start learning what you need to learn, even if you're going to be hands off. Meanwhile, don't waste time with it. Be out there reading or whatever. And so, those are clear biases.
Yeah, absolutely. I do think the concept of acting like constantly, like there's always, whether that's internal action or an external action, whatever, where there's constant action, might be worthy of a larger conversation.
Yeah, it's really true. We could have a whole podcast on that.
So yeah, look out for that one.
So other polarizing philosophies.
But yeah, to keep going, one of the things that can happen a lot is the idea of wanting your kids or your students to be happy, to enjoy what they're doing, to have a good time, versus pushing them toward progress. I can't talk, toward progression, and the sort of potential difficulty and potential conflict or even crisis that can come out of that. That you want your kids to be happy and enjoying stuff. You want your students to like what they're doing and like learning, but you also want them to be learning and actually be growing.
Any educator has experienced this sort of delicate
it's
balance.
Terrible.
Yes, it is. It is hard.
It's a hard one, and it's interesting being, and I think Tracy could attest to this too. Having raised now adult children, is kids have to learn how to be happy. Life isn't going to always keep them happy.
Right.
And we really don't do them any favors by trying to keep them happy all the time, right? I mean, some things they just have to do.
Yeah, you have to learn to entertain yourself. You have to learn to put yourself back to sleep as a baby.
Yeah.
You have to learn to
sometimes
sometimes
go in and get them up every time
sometimes
they roll
do
over.
things that are, not your favorite, right? Yeah.
Right.
As we all have to do.
Right. I mean, there's plenty of things I have to do that are not my favorites, you know? Now, do I want to live my whole life 24/7 doing those things?
Right,
No.
and never have any fun? No. Yeah.
But actually, happiness is very much an attitude, and if I get my own way all the time, that doesn't necessarily make me happy. So
and
you
you
have
can
this, what does
develop-
it mean to be happy, right?
Right.
You can develop true happiness from accomplishment.
Right.
Of something that originally was very difficult.
Right,
And,
exactly.
right.
I think
And from pain. I mean, people who've been through some major life struggles. I have a brother-in-law who battled stage 3 brain cancer. Nobody was happy during that time, but there were joyful, peaceful, grace-filled events from that. And in the midst of that, that you just can't even imagine. So people have been in those kinds of situations. So when we talk about, this, how far do we push versus letting kids be happy?
Right.
That
Try
is
to
a really
avoid
hard.
Yeah.
it is.
That's a hard philosophy to
I
to
feel
look
like
at,
you can
To wrestle
also
with.
to wrestle with.
Yeah, you can also end up with this, well, I know that as an adult you're going to encounter things that you don't like, and you're going to encounter this idea that you have to deal with upsetting. So why put it on them now?
Right.
So, why put your kid through
I'll
that?
try to protect you now. Right.
But I think part of the fallacy of that is that just like with anything that you have to learn how to deal with or learn how to do, is that if you've reached a stage of adulthood and suddenly have to encounter something that is not your fave,
And you've never
had to deal with it, so you've never had an opportunity to learn how to deal
practice,
with it.
practice.
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
So I get the idea of wanting, I have that
Yeah.
with my students when it's like, you don't like what we're doing, and I'm really sorry.
And no one likes to feel like the enemy either. That's the
Right.
hard part about being the teacher is while you may know I need to push them, you may struggle to actually get to that point because you don't like being disliked. I mean, and this is someone who I'm speaking as someone who tends to maybe push more than I should sometimes, but it isn't fun when a kid is looking at you like you're the reason I have to do this.
Are we done yet?
Right? And you're that's not
And
cool.
I hate you.
Right.
So that flows really nicely into the next kind of flip-flop balance philosophy, which is this idea of having empathy toward your student or with your student. I guess you have empathy with somebody, or the risk of being emotionally manipulated by your students or your kids, which can happen a lot and is a really hard line to see until you've crossed it or even on way the other side of it and looking back and going, oh, oops, shouldn't have gone that far. And it can happen with pushing, that if you're pushing toward progress or pushing for something and then it's a student who doesn't like what they're doing and they know a way to get around that, and you're letting them because you know it's hard for them, are you sitting in the empathy circle or are you sitting in the I let them kind
Emotional manipulation.
of trick me into not working on something anymore?
Well, and so it can be happening on both the teacher and the student part, right? It's easy to be manipulated by the kids. They often know how to get you to not make them do things, whether you're their parent or just their teacher, or both. And then also, as you said, sometimes like I've made someone cry accidentally, right? And we
Yes,
all have
right.
those
You don't
moments
wanna
where
do
you're
that,
like,
yeah.
oh man, I didn't want to be that teacher, and I had no idea it was coming too, because sometimes kids can really make it seem like they're okay, and you've been subtly communicating something that's hurting them, and then they burst into tears, right? And then and you have to take a real step back and look at what was the emotional, environment
yeah.
there that I had created that resulted negatively.
But as a parent, you're going to have kids who will, suddenly burst out at you.
Right.
That is, I mean, as a 13-year-old, you're really not as rational, So, or a 2-year-old is not as rational. I hate to compare those two ages, but sometimes, but it's,
Hey, I thought we were past this.
it's not reasonable. It's just this flood of emotion, and while, you are like, okay, let's take a deep breath here. At the same time, it doesn't change the fact that, no, you still can't go out with that person who I totally don't trust, and, and they can't drive, So, there's always this push and pull with your kids' emotions, I think, when you're a parent. It's tough.
Right.
Yeah. The last kind of back and forth, and we have mentioned this throughout, and we've mentioned it in previous podcasts as well, is this idea of a process versus a program, which is a really clean and nice alliterative way of saying that what you're trying to think about is a philosophy or an approach to education and an approach to learning and an entire kind of, universe of thinking about something versus, and I put in air quotes, finding the right program. Mm-hmm. And which of those two kind of ideas is actually going to result in the most and the best progress for you and for the people you're teaching.
Right. If you consider your teaching as a process, right, there are many components that I'm folding in. There are bits and pieces of different approaches that I'm maybe pulling from, and I'm trying to kind of tailor my teaching for this student that will result in the most success for them, as opposed to I'm hoping there's a program out there that has everything I need,
right,
which might result in starting lots of things and feeling like they didn't immediately meet the needs and, throwing them away and starting a new one. You might feel like, oh, I've gone through many programs and I feel like nothing's working. Right. And that could be because, first of all, some things take more time than you may be giving it, but also education tends to not be sort of this one philosophy, right? There are so many different people with many different approaches, and there's like so many voices, and that's why many what are the word I'm looking for? Many homeschool parents are using these various aspects of different things because they've realized that there's value in many different places, many different people with very different
traditional educators
ideas. Right.
do too, right? They're pulling from these different philosophies. It's interesting because there's a direct story back to my story of Emma, in that Emma is actually a very strong math thinker, but she was not a good math performer, so she didn't like math in school, in homeschool and traditional school both. And just to clarify, Emma was in traditional school K through 3rd grade, homeschooled 4th through 8th grade, back in traditional school for high school, and then of course college. So I tried a different program because I could really see that, a math page full of a bunch of questions was not going to be fun for her at all. And I had picked the program Math-U-See. Now, all of Emma's response to having to get her math work done didn't change. But Math-U-See was a good choice for her. So I could have thought, oh, wait, I just haven't found the right program yet.
Chuck it.
Yes.
Try something else.
But instead, I realized that there were aspects of this we were on the right track. And there were pieces here that I had something to learn from, of why this felt a little better. For one thing, just a lot more white space on the page. And then from there, I was going through this process. So I could have kept flipping programs, and I tried a couple. And certainly when she was in school, she had to use what they used. But just switching programs wouldn't have solved anything. All I would have done was have a different program every year. And that actually would have been even more inconsistent.
Yeah, so you do have more as a process.
Yeah, you have to give things time. I mean, try to do your homework and know you're on the right track here. Find the people who can help you, which is what we're leading to. Right. But a lot of flipping around doesn't really take care of a problem.
Reflect on a program too. What are the components of this that I like and may want to keep, and am I sort of taking all of it and assuming everything about this is perfect, or maybe there are just bits and I wish this could change, and do I need to pull something else in to provide that this program lacks?
Nice.
Yeah. So question 5 is kind of a two-parter. What do I need to learn, and who can help me learn that? And this goes right back to our hero's journey we've been talking about, because part of the classic hero journey is that eventually the hero meets a mentor who helps guide them, gives them some of the tools that they're lacking in order to do the impossible task.
Seemingly impossible.
Yes.
Right, and we all have mentors, and I think those mentors can be in obvious places and they are in unexpected places. And just because someone has a particular credential doesn't mean they're going to be your mentor, right? I did a lot of extra reading. And I remember I was reading Mel Levine's book, and he had described this form of attention that was the non-hyperactivity attention deficit, in which kids seem to come to a slow grinding halt as they worked. And I just remember, and I shared that with Emma, this slow grinding halt. Like, it helped us put words on it. Like, she'd start out and then just kind of fizzle, and then we began to identify. So when you're coming to this grinding halt in your work, what do we need to do? How could we make that better? And she and I together would have a lot of conversation around that. And just having that image, that wording around it, and I see it in some of my students, and I've shared this phrase with a lot of other parents about their kids, that understanding that for me was just these words that I really could wrap the whole concept around about what she was really experiencing. It just so happens my sister specializes in behavior management, so she works a lot with kids who have various kinds of behavior problems, and also some of those children also have attention problems. And she gave me some strategies that she had found particularly helpful. One of them I share in a blog that's about how we'd done this whole Post-it note calendar, and we did that. You can find that in my blogs. And then also I mentioned already that I had this friend Jo Dyke who, I just thought more like I'm a thought, and she was an adult, and I thought she could help me understand maybe a little bit about if I was teaching you, Jo, what would you want, and so that mentorship was based on just pure personality and friendship and being someone that I respected and had good insight. So
awesome. So in wrapping up, the discussion today was really about, how are you building into your own knowledge and understanding as an educator. It's easy to just sort of run with what you have, but we need to constantly try to be feeding that. If we are not unending resources, we will also grind to a halt if coming against struggle constantly. So we want you to be thinking about building into your own self as an educator, and a big part of that is starting with this reflection, especially around the areas that can be a bit difficult, and asking yourself these questions that we had you ask today.
Yeah, and that really one of the points that Rita kept coming back to is that idea of mentorship, or building that select few group of people, that these are people that you trust, that you are comfortable asking hard questions and having hard conversations with, or potentially hard I guess they could be easy, but probably not.
If they were easy, you probably wouldn't be there.
Right. And making sure that there's someone in your life who in some way, shape, or form can help you challenge your own perspective and your own way of thinking, and that might open you to something new and something potentially better than what you are currently doing.
Right. Mentors need mentors.
Yes.
Right. You can't be a mentor for your students unless you have some mentors in your life as well.
Right. Which will really help you.
I've had plenty of mentors, and now I'm in the role of being a mentor, and I just don't think there's an end to that,
Because we still have them.
Yes, we do still have them. Absolutely, we still have them.
Right.
Yeah.
And then asking yourself, are you on a path to progress, or are you not? Where are you in your education? And if you're sensing some areas, it might not be overall, but some areas where you sense that the progress has stopped, and there's some sort of barrier there. starting to dig into that and not being afraid to, because that's part of life, and it's part of what makes you a hero educator.
Yeah, take the time to go through these 5 questions. Do it formally if you want. Get a journal out and see what you can discover.
You know, it makes us better humans. I mean, good teachers have to be good humans first, really. I don't know if I've ever known a good teacher that wasn't a good human.
I was going to say, and one of my favorite teacher stories I have of a teacher of mine growing up was one that had wronged me and apologized for it and changed. And that's one of the things that sticks out in my mind as a mark of that teacher having been a good teacher.
Yeah, one of your favorites, too.
One of my favorites.
Right.
Well, thank you guys so much for listening today. It was a deep conversation, right? A pretty heavy conversation, but it's all good stuff. We had mentioned at the beginning, we are very excited to be able to offer our listeners 20% off on our Sticky Ideas winter product. It's got all kinds of great winter-themed activities that are kind of fun learning opportunities, bits and pieces of writing, a little bit of grammar, a little word study, all multi-sensory
As
stuff.
we do, folding in all the areas of language arts.
Right, like we like to do.
Just some more fun activities to roll into what you're already doing.
Right. Yeah, we have this winter packet in a file drawer that I've been pulling out for years and adding to for years, and we kind of pulled it out
Finally
and said,
thought,
hey, let's share this.
Right.
So.
Good stuff in there. And they're cute to boot. So.
Yeah. Cute to boot.
But that, if you go to our website, rootedinlanguage.com, if you put that Sticky Ideas Winter at checkout, you can use the code HERO20, HERO, number 2, the number 0, and that'll be 20% off of that. So thank you guys so much for listening. You've been a wonderful audience.
Thank
Bye.
you.